Honest judge! I stood in front of the door reflecting on my life. I was 67 years old, married to the love of my life, and had 2 wonderful children and 5 grandchildren. My life has been as good as it could be. My wife Maggie was a saint throughout our marriage. She stayed home and took care of the kids and the house. There was never a complaint from her. I have stood in front of that door many times, sometimes in anger, sometimes in terror, sometimes in anxiety, wondering what lies ahead. I just never know what's going to happen. When I crossed the threshold, it was eerily quiet. Then I heard the inevitable. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Jeffrey Stone is here." I walked over to my bench, which towered above the rest of the room. I looked around the room. A man and his lawyer on one side, a woman and her lawyer on the other, a court stenographer, a bailiff, and a secretary. "Sit down," I said, taking my seat. I looked at the file in front of me and turned it over, reading the information it contained. It appeared the husband was seeking a divorce. "Your Honor, the case is Sullivan versus Sullivan," the clerk said. I looked up at the assembled people. "Okay, Mr. Sullivan, you're seeking a divorce based on irreconcilable differences, with a 50-50 division of property and joint custody of minor children. Is that correct?" Mr. Sullivan leaned forward to the microphone on the table and said, "That is correct, Your Honor." I looked at the opposite side. "Mr. Snyder, does your client agree to these terms?" He stood up and said, "No, Your Honor. She does not want a divorce and wants to see a psychologist to try to reconcile and save the marriage." I looked around both sides. Mr. Sullivan was whispering something to his attorney. "I tend to agree that counseling is necessary, as I am all in favor of saving any marriage if at all possible." Mr. Sullivan's attorney stood up and said, "Your Honor, at this time we wish to withdraw the motion for divorce." Well, I've never seen anything work out so well so quickly. However, if that's what you want, the case is dismissed. I banged the gavel. The wife stood smiling. She went towards her husband to hug him, but he completely ignored her and just walked out of the room. She stood stunned and started crying. I had a feeling that this wouldn't be the last time I see these two. I went back to my chambers and plopped into a chair. On my desk was a picture of my wife and children when they were younger. I picked it up and looked at it. They were so young and innocent. It saddens me to see people like these two who have children have to go through something so hard. I picked up the phone and dialed my daughter's number. After a few rings, she answered. "Hi, honey. I'm just calling to see how you're doing." "Hi, Daddy. I think I'm doing okay. How about you?" "I'm doing fine, honey." "But you don't sound like you're doing fine. What's going on with you?" She sighed and started to sob a little. "Oh, Daddy, Michael and I are having problems. I think we may end up getting a divorce. He's been so distant lately. I have a lot of work and no free time at all. I don't know what to do." "I'm sorry to hear that, honey. Have you tried talking to him? Maybe you should see a counselor. Marriage takes a lot of work. It's not something you can just let sit back and hope it works out. Just look at me and my mom. We had many ups and downs, but we never got far because we worked on our communication every day. You need to tell him how you feel. You need to make him understand." "I know, Dad. You and Mom are the most wonderful parents anyone could ever dream of. I've tried to talk to him, but he just doesn't seem to want to listen," she said. "Then make him listen. Do your best. Don't give up. Put it in a letter or an email. Whatever it takes, you need to make him listen and understand how you feel." "Okay, Dad. I'll try to do that. Thank you for listening to me. It made me feel a little better. You always know how to make my day better. I love you, Daddy." "I love you to bits, honey. Call me if you need anything." A week later, I was standing in front of those doors again, and I had a sense of unease. I had a feeling it was going to be a rough day. I went in. "All right, the Honorable Judge Jeffrey Stone is here." I walked over to my bench and sat down. "Have a seat." I looked at the people, And sure enough, they were back again. I looked over the case file, opening it up. Divorce based on adultery. Well, the situation escalated pretty quickly. Well, after all, it's New York. You can do that as long as there's evidence. So, I see we're back again. Mr. Sullivan, divorce on grounds of adultery. I assume, Mr. Wright, that you and your client have evidence of that infidelity? He stood up, holding a thick envelope. Yes, Your Honor. He handed the envelope to the bailiff, who brought it to me. I looked at Mr. Sullivan. Why did you first attempt a divorce based on irreconcilable differences and then decide to back out and move to infidelity when you had all the evidence from the beginning? Your Honor, I am not a malicious person. I didn't want the public to know what she did. I offered a fair deal. However, since she decided she didn't want a fair deal, I felt I had no choice but to go that route and publicize what she had done. I looked in Mrs. Sullivan's direction. Okay, counselor, it's your turn. He stood up. Your Honor, my client has her own evidence that her husband also cheated. She knew he had been sleeping around for some time, and that was the only reason she had an affair. We have the evidence here. He's giving the bailiff the evidence to give to me. I see. Taking the evidence envelopes in my hands, I said, I'm going to need some time to think about this. We'll reconvene in an hour. I banged the gavel, and everyone filed out of the room. I walked to my office and threw the envelopes on the desk. I poured myself a glass of cold water from the mini-fridge and sat down to get to work. The first thing that caught my eye were the photographs. There were dozens of them. They showed Mrs. Sullivan and her lover in various outfits and in various stages of lovemaking. I reread the private investigator's report. It seemed that the investigation had been going on for 3 months. I will never understand why any husband or wife would want to wait that long. It just never made sense to me to subject myself to such additional torture. The cheaters met twice a week in the evenings. Once during the corny bachelorette party each week, and of course, the obligatory working late to get everything done. There was a video. I walked over to the couch and popped the DVD into the player. Well, I thought, there's nothing like watching homegrown adult videos at work. I pressed the play button and my senses were immediately assaulted by the ass of the man on Mrs. Sullivan. They looked like two animals fighting in the wild. There was definitely no love in what the two of them were doing in that first clip. Finished fiddling, they lay down on the bed. The man asked her, So, does your wimpy hubby make love to you as well as I do? She grinned. Not even close. I mean, he's not that bad. He's gentle and loving. He's just not as good and doesn't give me as much pleasure as you do. He laughed at that. Maybe you should turn it off for a while, and it will do a better job of showing the picture you want. I've already pretty much reduced lovemaking to once every couple weeks. Unless, of course, he starts whining about it. But lately he hasn't even bothered to try it. He hasn't really paid much attention to me or the kids. I have to send them to his parents whenever I need to get out of the house. I hit the stop button. I'd heard more than enough of this nonsense. I hated cheaters, I really did. However, nothing pissed me off more than someone mistreating children, especially when those children were their own. Then I took the time to look up the dirt on the husband. It was no better than the wife's. At least she was with one person. The husband was caught with about 10 different women. He could be heard on the video saying some pretty horrible things about his wife and kids that just made my blood boil. I called Mr. Sullivan's parents and asked them to come to court to hear the decision I was about to make. They told me they could be there in 10 minutes. I sat there thinking about what I was going to do until the 1-hour recess expired. I walked through the doors. All rise, the Honorable Judge Jeffrey Stone is present. I sank into my chair. Anger was boiling inside me, but I kept my professional demeanor the whole time. You may be seated. I looked around the room and saw the same people, as well as Mr. Sullivan's parents, sitting at the far end of the room. I have reviewed all of the evidence presented to me, and I must say that I am shocked at what I have witnessed. I cannot come to any decision at this time. There are other factors to consider. At this time, I have to think of the best interests of the children first and foremost. I feel that it would be best for them to live with their grandparents at this time. I am granting them temporary custody of both children until this whole matter is resolved." Both the attorneys and the parents immediately jumped up and started objecting. I banged the gavel on the table rather hard and loudly, nearly breaking it in half. "I will ensure order in the courtroom. This is my decision, and it is final. One more outburst like this, and you will all be held in contempt. Now sit down." I looked at the grandparents at the far end of the room. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, would you please step forward?" They stood up and walked to the front of the room. "At this time, I want the children placed with you where they can be safe and happy. Are you satisfied with that?" They both spoke at the same time. "Of course, Your Honor." Then the grandmother spoke. "Your Honor, we love our grandchildren to death and spend a lot of time with them. We would like them to be with us." "Then this is my order. Parents may have supervised visitation with the children 1 hour a week at your discretion and preferably at different times. However, before this begins, I would like to speak to both children myself. Could you bring them here tomorrow morning to meet with me?" "That won't be a problem, Your Honor. We'll have to take them out of school for a while, but I'm sure they'll be fine. They're very smart kids and they catch up very easily," Mrs. Sullivan said. "Then we'll see you tomorrow morning. This meeting is adjourned," I said, tapping my gavel and rising from the bench. I walked to my office and sat down at my desk. I looked at the picture of my wife on my desk and couldn't help but smile, remembering the first time I saw her back in my last year of college. Heading across campus to class with an armful of books in hand, I tripped over my own feet. The books went flying in all directions. I heard a giggle and looked up. There she was, the most beautiful girl I had ever seen in my life. She bent down to help me gather my books and asked if I was okay. I laughed at my own clumsiness and told her I was fine. From that moment on, I knew we were meant to be together. A year later, we were married. I had just passed the bar exams to start practicing law. Time really does fly by. I looked at the picture of the whole family, the son with his wife and children, and the daughter with her husband and children. All things considered, my life was turning out pretty good. I picked up my cell phone and dialed my son's number. It rang a few times before a young, shrill voice answered. "Hello, Stone Res? "Stonehouse," the young voice said. I couldn't help but laugh. It was my youngest granddaughter, Abby, answering the phone. "Well, hello, Ms. Abby. What are you doing today?" "Grandpa!" she shrieked with delight. "I miss you, Grandpa." "I miss you too, honey. Were you a good girl?" "I'm always a good girl, Grandpa," she said, as a matter of course. "Abigail, who's calling, honey?" I heard a woman's voice. It was Caroline, my sister-in-law. "It's Grandpa, Mommy," she said. "Grandpa, do you want to talk to Mommy?" "Sure, honey." "Okay, Grandpa. I love you." "I love you too, honey." "Hey, Daddy, is everything okay?" the daughter-in-law asked, grabbing her cell phone. "Caroline, honey, everything's just fine. I'm just calling to check in and see how you're doing. How are you and the kids doing? What's George up to? It's been a long time since he called me last." "I'm doing fine, Dad. I just got a promotion at work. Both girls are doing great. Abby just started kindergarten and Sophie just started first grade. George has been very busy at the firm. Dad, I don't have to tell you. He wants it to be a surprise, but he's about to be made partner." "That's wonderful, honey. Don't worry. I won't say anything, and I'll pretend to be surprised when he tells me," I grinned. "Thank you, Daddy. I'm sure he'll love it." "Well, honey, I'm still at the office, so now I have to go home. I'll talk to you later. Give the kids a kiss for me." "I will, Daddy. Good night," she replied. I hung up the phone, leaned back in my chair, and took a deep breath, stretching my arms above my head and getting ready to head home. The next morning, I was in my office when there was a knock on the door. The bailiff opened the door. "The Sullivan children are here with their grandparents, Your Honor." "Oh, yes. Let them in, please." Both the children and the grandparents entered the room. The children were quiet and seemed shy and reserved. I pictured a smile on my face as they looked at me. "Hello and welcome. Please come in, have a seat here on the couch, and let's talk for a while." "It's okay, kids. The judge just wants to talk to you guys for a little while," said their grandmother. They walked over to the couch and sat in the middle, with their grandparents sitting on either side of them. "Hi. You must be Mikala and William," I said. They both nodded their heads. "Yes, sir, Your Honor," said the older, 10-year-old Mikala. "Please just call me Jeff. I don't need Your Honor or anything like that here. So tell me, kids, do you guys have fun with your grandparents? Do you like living with them?" They nodded their heads. "Yes, sir. Grandma bakes us cookies," William said with a smile. I grinned. "That's good. My grandma used to bake me cookies all the time, too. Say, why don't you guys step back with the officer for a minute? I want to talk to your grandparents alone, and then I'll bring you guys back so we can chat. Is that not too difficult for you?" They both nodded and said, "Okay." I waited while the bailiff led the children out into the hall. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, the reason I've granted you temporary custody of the children is based on some things I've witnessed and heard, evidence of your sister-in-law's adultery. Now, this does not look good for anyone in terms of the welfare of the children. Their welfare should be prioritized over everything else." Mrs. Sullivan shook her head and said, sobbing, "You're right, Jeff. I honestly don't know where we went wrong in raising our son." I handed her a box of tissues from my desk. "None of this is your fault. Tell me, how often before this did the kids spend time with you? How often did parents ask you to babysit?" The sad truth is that the kids were with us more than they were with their parents. We played a much bigger role in their upbringing. Most of the time when they weren't working, the parents spent most of their time hanging around town somewhere. Sometimes with each other, sometimes with someone else, Mrs. Sullivan said. "I see. Could you both wait for me in the hall? I'd like to talk to the children for a while. Could you please send William to me first?" "Of course," Mrs. Sullivan said as they stood up and headed for the door. A few seconds later, little William appeared in the doorway. I looked at him and smiled. "Hi, William. Please come and sit down. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your mom and dad, if that's okay." He nodded and walked over and sat down on the couch and asked, "Am I in trouble? Is that why Mom and Dad fight all the time? The poor kid is only 8 years old, and he has to carry such a burden of his parents thinking it's his fault." I sighed. "No, William, you're not in trouble. Nothing is your fault. Do you often see Mom and Dad fighting?" He shook his head. "Yes, sir, all the time. It scares me a lot. I try to tell them I'm scared, but they just yell at me to be quiet and watch TV." "I see. Does your mom or dad ever spend time with you, playing games or reading to you before bed? How about at dinner time you all sit down together and eat like a family?" "No, sir, they always tell me to just go to bed. My sister usually helps me get ready and puts me to bed for the night. I spend most of my time playing with her or with my grandparents when we're at their place." I sighed. "Okay, William, why don't you go out into the hallway to your grandparents and please ask your sister to come in for a few minutes. Thank you for taking the time to come and talk to me." The boy stood up, smiled at me, and shook my hand. It surprised me to hear that from an 8-year-old boy. "You're welcome, sir, and thank you for helping my family." I was rendered speechless at the sight of the seriousness this little kid had, and immediately realized that this must have been the grandparents' doing. A few seconds later, Mikala came in and sat down in front of me. "Hi, Mikala. I just want to ask you a few questions and then you can go home to your grandparents. Is that okay?" "Yes, sir." "Mikala, do you like living with your grandparents?" "Yes, very much. Grandma lets me help her bake cookies and Grandpa always helps me with my schoolwork," she said. "That's nice. That's what good grandparents are supposed to do. Did your mom and dad ever do anything like that with you?" She looked so sad when I asked that. "No, sir. They're always too busy. They're always fighting with each other or they're not home. Sometimes when I ask for help, They call me bad words and tell me to leave, she said, with tears in her eyes. My heart began to ache for the poor child. I immediately realized what needed to be done. Okay, honey. We don't need to talk about this anymore. Why don't you go outside and ask your grandparents to come in for a minute? Okay, thank you, sir, she said, as she stood up and headed for the door. A few seconds later, my grandparents walked in and sat down in front of me. Well, it's pretty obvious that neither of the children like or want to be at home with their parents, and I'm inclined to not let either parent keep them for the moment. At this point, they will stay with you until further notice. The court will reconvene soon, and we will see what we can do then. I thanked them for bringing the children and walked them out. I picked up the phone from the table, dialed my son's home number, and listened to it ring a couple times before the phone was picked up. A male voice answered, "Hello, Stone's residence. George, son, it's good to finally catch you home." "Hi, Dad." "Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been very busy these last few weeks. Caroline and Abby told me you called the other day," he laughed. Abby hadn't really stopped talking about it. I let out a chuckle. "Such a sweet girl. I miss her and little Joe, too. You know Mom's birthday is coming up. You're going to come, aren't you? You and your sister." "Sure, Pa. I've already talked to Sarah about it. We wouldn't miss it for the world. We'll both be there this weekend," he said. "Good. Then I look forward to seeing you. Give my grandchildren a kiss and hug for me, and I'll talk to you later." "Bye, Dad," he said, and we both hung up. I walked through those doors again to hear, "All rise. The Honorable Jeffrey Stone is here." I sat down and looked around at the people in the courtroom. Two lawyers who cared less about anything but the money they were being paid for their work. Two people who had once loved and cherished each other, but now sat as far away from each other as possible, even despised each other. It was a sad world we lived in. After examining all the evidence and talking to the children, I came to a decision. As for the marriage, most judges would have sought counseling to try to work things out. However, based on the evidence of some people I have spoken to and your own attitude, I find that this would be unwise. I would prefer to keep you both as far away from each other as possible. Therefore, I am declaring this marriage dissolved, and I am also issuing an injunction to keep you both closer than 1,000 yards apart. As for alimony, Mr. Sullivan makes a lot more money than his wife. Mr. Sullivan, I order you to pay the sum of $2,300 per month." "Yes! Eat it, asshole!" Mrs. Sullivan shouted. I banged my gavel, glaring at her fiercely. "I will bring order to this court, Mrs. Sullivan, or you will be held in contempt of court." She quickly calmed down, looking smugly at her husband. "As I said, it's only $2,300, Mr. Sullivan, $1,300 of which will go to child support and $1,000 to alimony. Child support is paid until the oldest turns 18, then decreases to $650 a month, and ends when the youngest reaches adulthood. Child support will be paid for 2 years or until Mrs. Sullivan remarries." Mrs. Sullivan cried out loudly, "My money!" I looked at her. "As for you, Mrs. Sullivan, you are also ordered to pay child support, although because of your lower income, your amount will be $600 per month. Same reductions according to the age of the children." I cast a stern look at her. "I will not tolerate gold diggers in my courtroom, Mrs. Sullivan. I play by the rules of this state. I will not allow a fortune to be swindled from my husband, especially when you are no better than he is. Frankly, you'd be doing me, your family, and the whole town a favor if you both moved. However, I cannot force you to do so. I have never, in all my years on this bench, seen a more disgusting and despicable couple than you two. Now, as for the children, they will remain in the temporary custody of their grandparents. You're both required to attend a 6-week parenting class. Once the classes are over, we will revisit your children's situation. If you don't bother to attend any classes, permanent custody will be given to the grandparents, and visitation will be limited to 1 hour per month of supervised visitation. This case is closed." I banged my gavel and looked around at the people in the room. The look of shock on the faces of both parties at the words I had just uttered was almost comical. Neither of them dared to speak about it, and eventually they walked out of the courtroom. It was the weekend. My kids and grandkids were coming home to celebrate my mom's birthday. On the way, I stopped by a local florist to buy a bouquet of lilies. They were Maggie's favorite. As I stood in line to pay for the flowers, I looked back on my life and smiled. I had a wonderful life, full and rich with love and laughter. I have 2 wonderful children and 5 grandchildren that I love more than anything in the world. I had a wife whom I loved devotedly and who loved me faithfully for many years. I met the children outside and we went to visit their mother. I slowly approached my loving wife. "Hello, my darling. Oh, how I miss you." I knelt down by the stone with the inscription, "Maggie Stone, loving wife, mother, and grandmother. Gone too soon." I wiped away a tear as I laid flowers on the grave. Cancer is a terrible thing, something that, despite my best efforts, I just couldn't fight and win, no matter how much I wanted to. The children came over, leaving flowers for their mother, wrapped their arms around me on both sides and pulled me closer to them. "Happy birthday, Mom," they said. After sitting in silence for a few minutes, we went back to my house, had dinner together, and indulged in memories of the old days when they were younger. I stayed on the bench for a few more years. There were many more divorces. Even managed to save a few marriages, ended a few others. I eventually retired and moved to a smaller house, closer to the kids, so I could spend more time with the grandkids and just be with my family for the rest of my life. As for the Sullivan children, their parents never finished their parenting classes. The mother, as far as I know, ran off with some guy and never came back. As for the father, he's still around but rarely sees his kids. I gave permanent custody to the grandparents. Both children have grown up to be balanced, respectful adults. They both married and have children of their own, whom they are raising the way their grandparents taught them. In the end, things worked out for the Sullivan children in the best way possible. The end.